The little fingers did not hurt. They no longer felt anything, having turned into pale, semi-transparent wax candles, halfway sunken into the deep, prickly snow. The boy was only 7 years old. His name was Kansi Wu, but in the system logs of this world he did not even have a letter rank, simply noise, a byproduct of a failed union between two high-rank hunters. The kingdom of hunters rested on 3 guilds. But here, at the very edge of the forbidden rift Black Forest, there were neither the neon-gleaming skyscrapers of soul nor the flashes of healing magic. There were only centuries-old pines stretching into a leaden sky and a piercing wind that howled between bare rocks like a funeral lament. She had left exactly 3 hours ago. Manhwa, an S-rank huntress from the White Phoenix Guild, a woman with a flawless face and icy eyes, whose fire magic could incinerate entire dungeons. She had brought him here by the hand, saying it was a special training session for core awakening. She promised to return in 15 minutes. She did not return. She simply crossed him out of her perfect biography, like an uneven, dirty brushstroke that spoiled the picture of her greatness. For an S rank, a weak child with no trace of mana was an indelible stain on one's reputation. Siwu lay on his stomach, his dark, almost black hair clinging to his frost-covered forehead. From his left, I rolled the last tear, which instantly turned into a tiny sliver of ice on his pale cheek. He heard footsteps, measured, heavy footsteps of her elite boots, retreating toward the teleportation zone. Even clear, 1 frame per minute. At first the sound was distinct, then it blended with the rustle of falling snow, and then came absolute vacuum silence. Chronic, the doctors at the association had said when they examined him in childhood. Complete atrophy of the magic channels. Inability to hold the shape of mana. Now he understood that it had not been an illness. His body simply refused to accept the digitized, dry mana that modern hunters used. He was an outsider to their system, and the system closed his file. Subject Kansi Wu has died recalculating location geometry. But the world of the Rift was not a blank canvas. Black Forest lived by its own ancient laws, which had existed long before the publisher launched the Hunter system. The roots of the old trees pulsed with a dim, crimson light, absorbing the remnants of the boy's fading spark. Suddenly the silence exploded, not with sound, but with a strange analog noise, as if someone had forcefully dragged a dry brush across a stretched canvas. Warning: critical data conflict detected. Subject's soul refused transfer to the recycle bin. Anomalous fusion with the Rift Core recorded. Unique skill awakened. Wild blood palette, rank. Around Si Wu's frozen body, the snow began to rapidly blacken, turning into a thick, oily liquid resembling artistic ink. Thin, ragged threads of this black pigment stretched from the ground, sinking into his pale wrists, penetrating under his nails, and rushing straight toward his stopped heart. Beneath the boy's eyes, directly through the frost-covered skin, emerged 2 ragged, ink-black streaks descending to the very jaw, exactly like those of the wild predators of the underside. A mark of ugliness, elite mages would have said. A mark that he was no longer human. He knew. Siwu sharply opened his eyes. His left eye remained as before, deep, dark, full of human pain. But the right one blazed with a toxic, feral neon, within which, instead of a pupil, a broken system loading icon slowly rotated. He did not feel the cold. He felt form, 10 meters from him, hiding behind a snow-covered boulder. A creature stood frozen. It was a shadow Fong, a lesser inhabitant of this rift, a massive wolf whose fur consisted of squirming charcoal textures, and instead of paws had sharp, razor-like bony growths. A 0-level monster. It had come to devour the corpse of the boy, but now it stood still, sensing the wave of primordial terror emanating from the reanimated body. First memory layer of the location available object for copying, Shadow Fong. Do you wish to apply the tool stroke of form? Siwu slowly propped himself up on his elbows. His movements were jagged, the frame rate of his body seeming disrupted, as if his figure had been cut from an old rough draft and crudely pasted into this perfect three-dimensional landscape. For what reason? Must I remain in this grave? The boy rasped hoarsely. His voice was no longer a child's. Within it rang a distinct, guttural growl of a beast. He thrust his right hand forward. The black, oily ink seeping from his pores instantly shot upward, taking the shape of long, curved claws. The wolf sensed the threat and leaped. Its body in flight broke apart into gray pixels, increasing in speed. Even clear, a straight-line attack. The shadow Fong hurtled toward him, raising clouds of icy dust. The creature's speed was enormous for an ordinary human, but for Si Wu, whose perception was now broken into individual frames, the monster's trajectory was traced in advance as thick red lines of intent stretching from the wolf's paws to the boy's neck. Si Wu did not dodge. He waited for the moment when the wolf's model would intersect with his own work area. Merge visible layers, Si Wu roared, throwing his right hand forward to meet the flying beast. The black ink enveloping his fingers lurched forward, turning into a voluminous, heavy blot that smashed directly into the wolf's muzzle. The density of this paint was so high that the shadow Fong at full speed literally became mired in the air, as if it had crashed into an undried layer of oil ground. Its pixel animation of a leap froze, displaying a system error. The wolf yelped wildly, trying to break free from the viscous black mass, but Si Wu was already sliding across the snow toward its left flank. His steps were jagged. One frame, he was at the boulder. The next frame, he was already pinning down the thrashing body of the monster. He drove his ink claws directly into the wolf's neck, where the creature's small system core pulsed. Contour erasure, the boy exhaled. The liquid black pigment from his hands poured inside the shadow Fong. The beast's fur began to rapidly fade, turning into a gray, dirty pencil sketch, and then crumbled entirely into thousands of tiny graphite fragments. Target destroyed texture absorption, 100% warning. Initiating rendering process. A wild, convulsive pain shot through Si Wu's body. This was that very chronic rejection, but now it worked in reverse. His bones began to crack, rearranging themselves to fit a new geometry. His human clothing tore, turning into scraps of black fog. His arms lengthened, becoming covered in rigid, charcoal fur, and his fingers finally turned into bone blades. Within a minute, on the snow-covered hill, instead of a frozen boy stood a massive, 2-meter shadow Fong. Its left eye remained human, full of icy, calculated hatred, while the right burned with a red system neon. It raised its muzzle to the leaden sky and let out a deafening, rolling roar that shook snow from the pines. There was no bewilderment in that roar. It was a precise, measured declaration of war. From the depths of the Black Forest, drawn by the noise of battle and the anomalous Manhwa wave, other inhabitants began to emerge. From behind the trees slowly crawled 3 stone slugs, shapeless boulders covered in violet moss, whose bodies breathed with a muffled crunch. Even clear, encirclement complete. 3 in front, 2 coming from behind. Si Wu, in the form of the wolf, crouched low. His tail, woven from black smoke, lazily trailed along the snow. They didn't tell you, Mother, that this forest has so much material for my new palette, he whispered soundlessly inside his new mind. But I will collect them all, down to the last brushstroke. The stone slugs were approaching slowly but inexorably. Their heavy, monolithic bodies left deep, dirty furrows in the pristine white snow, smelling of swamp sludge and raw iron. To the system, these creatures were walking F-rank tanks, whose defense exceeded any standard parameters. But for Si Wu, they were merely volumetric, geometric shapes with a predictable trajectory. The boy wolf's right neon eye spun frantically, overlaying the gray boulders of the slugs with a translucent polygon grid. He saw every microcrack in their stone armor, every node where the violet threads of swamp mana converged. For what reason do you believe that stone is stronger than a living brush? Si Wu growled gutturally, and his new, Lupin voice made the rotting needles tremble on the pine branches. One of the slugs, the largest, abruptly contracted, then with a deafening crack fired from its center an enormous, jagged stone spike. The projectile speed was such that the air around it went gray with pixels. Even clear, direct hit to the chest cavity. Siwoo, using the beast reflexes of a shadow fawn, sharply pushed off with his hind paws from the frozen ground. The frame rate of his leap was so jagged that in the air, for a moment, 3 ghostly silhouettes of him hung frozen simultaneously, an animation trail. The stone spike pierced one of these phantoms, blowing apart a centuries-old pine behind him with a crash. The tree fell, raising a cloud of snow dust and exposing the black, rotting wood beneath. Manhwa landed squarely on the back of the slug that had fired. His bone claws scraped against the monster's granite hide, striking showers of sparks. "Chronic," he cried out inside his mind. "Your sluggishness is a chronic design flaw." Skill activated. Stroke of form/texture overload. Instead of trying to bite through the stone shell with his teeth, Siwoo released from his claws a dense, oily black ink. It instantly filled every crack on the slug's body, seeping into the porous stone like ink into a dry blotter. The violet moss on the monster immediately yellowed and began to char. The slug shrieked wildly. The sound resembled the screech of trains' brakes. Its stone flesh, under the influence of the wild blood palette, began to rapidly lose density, turning into loose, raw clay. The other 2 slugs, realizing their leader was being destroyed from within, simultaneously charged. They accelerated, turning into 2 rolling stone boulders, cutting off all of Siwoo's escape routes. To the right, a sheer cliff. To the left, a falling pine. Even clear, the frame's box is closing. They didn't mention that rocks can work as a team. Siwoo bared his teeth. He did not leap off the weakening monster beneath him. On the contrary, he drove his paws even deeper into the softening clay and forcefully wrenched it toward himself, redirecting the remnants of the dying creature's mana. Emergency tool applied. Gaussian blur/local shift at the very second when the 2 rolling slugs should have smeared the wolf across the granite. Siwoo sharply swung his smoky tail. The space around him lost sharpness of focus. The movement vectors of the 2 attacking monsters shifted by just a few degrees. A deafening impact rang out. The 2 stone slugs at full speed crashed into each other, missing Siwoo's blurred figure. Their stone shells shattered into thousands of fragments, and their system cores, unable to withstand the head-on collision, burst, staining the snow a toxic violet with leaked mana. The first slug beneath Siwoo's paws had by this point fully dissolved, turning into a shapeless black blot on a white background. Target's destroyed essence of stone slugs absorbed 3/3 your current form. Shadow Fong modification. Granite shell the body of the wolf, inhabited by the mind of 7-year-old Siwoo, shuddered with a convulsion once more. The charcoal fur on his back and sides began to rapidly grow, covered with heavy, flat plates of gray stone, forming natural armor. Beneath his eyes, the black ink trails grew wider still, now reaching all the way to his neck. He had become heavier. His paws now left deep, cracked imprints in the earth, but the force of his strike had increased many times over. Suddenly, from deep in the thicket came a thin, piercing whistle. It was not a monster. It was the sound of a system detection signal. Onto the snow-covered clearing, landing softly on the pine branches, leaped 3 figures. They wore light, maneuverable silver-colored armor bearing an emblem in the shape of a burning wing, scouts of the White Phoenix Guild. The very people who had provided the security perimeter for his mother, Manhwa. They had returned, but not for him. They were cleansing the rift of extraneous elements. Above the group leader's head hung an interface. S-rank hunter, Pak Jin-woo. Class, tracker. Commander, there's an anomalous mana surge here. One of the scouts said quickly, raising a short magic crossbow and aiming directly at Siwoo's right neon eye. Looks like a mutated shadow fawn. But structure, it seems to double up on the radars. Pak Jin-woo narrowed his eyes, studying the stone plates on the wolf's body and the two black trails beneath the beast's eyes, in which the outlines of human tears could be discerned. Doesn't matter. The monster's rank does not exceed E. Even clear. Remove it so it doesn't interfere with Lady Min's evacuation, the S rank coldly commanded. Siwoo slowly rose to his full, enormous, stone-weighted height. His left human eye blazed with such wild, concentrated fury that the scouts involuntarily took a step back, gripping their weapons more tightly. For what reason? Do you call me a monster? The boy whispered soundlessly, with lips alone, inside the wolf's maw. You yourselves brought me here to die. The rift's border guard had changed. The time for the hunt had begun. 3 humans against 1 altered beast. The group's leader, Pak Jin-woo, had no intention of negotiating with the creature. He made a short, sharp wave of his palm. Even clear. Liquidation order. The 2 scouts on the flanks immediately broke into motion. The one holding the crossbow instantly pulled the trigger. An arrow, enveloped in the S-rank's wind mana, sliced through the frosty air with a whistle, aimed precisely at Siwoo's left human eye. The speed of the attack was such that an ordinary Shadow Fong would not have even had time to turn its head. But Siwoo was no longer an ordinary inhabitant of the rift. The world around him split once more into transparent, schematic frames. Siwoo sharply jerked his head to the right. The wind arrow passed a millimeter from his ear, cleanly shearing off several stiff charcoal hairs at the root, and buried itself into the snowdrift behind him with a wail, raising an entire geyser of frozen earth and sparks. Before the crossbowman could reload his weapon, Siwoo, using the power of the granite plates on his paws, executed a heavy, crushing roar leap forward. His frame rate blurred. I heard, Siwoo bellowed, and that guttural, broken sound made the scouts clap their hands over their ears for a moment. I heard you laughing when she left me in the ravine. He crashed with his entire 2-meter mass, weighted by stone armor, directly onto the crossbowman. The hunter managed to raise a light silver shield in front of himself, but under the weight of the modified Shadow Fong, the metal simply crumpled like foil. There was a distinct crunch of breaking bones. The crossbowman flew to the side with a dull groan, his body plowing a deep furrow in the snow, and the interface above his head flickered and turned an alarming yellow. Status: critical injury / broken ribcage. Damn, this isn't E rank. It's a hidden elite boss, shouted the second scout, armed with 2 long daggers burning brightly with the orange flame of White Phoenix. He came from behind Siwoo, attempting to sever his smoky tail. The daggers plunged into the stone plates on the boy wolf's thigh. The fire began to furiously burn through the stone structure, melting the granite to the state of liquid, glowing magma. Siwoo felt a wild, searing pain. His mother's fire, even transmitted through subordinates, wounded him more than any monster's claws. For what reason? Do you use her flame against me? Siwoo roared. Hidden palette layer activated. Rotten pine needles / pigment contamination from the cracks in his stone shell directly into the flame of the daggers, spurted not blood but thick, foul-smelling black ink mixed with rotting pine needles and swamp sludge from the rift. This caustic analog pigment instantly enveloped the hunter's fire blades. The orange flame hissed, became covered in dirty soot, and went out with a crack, while the daggers themselves began to rapidly rust and crumble right in the scout's hands. What the hell? My weapon is disintegrating. The system can't recognize the type of debuff. The dagger wielder screamed in panic, retreating backward. But Siwoo did not let him escape. His smoky tail sharply elongated, turning into a heavy ink whip, which lashed the hunter across the face, knocking his protective helmet off and slamming his head into a tree trunk. The second opponent was taken out of the fight. Only Pak Jin-woo remained, the group's leader, S rank. He stood motionless, his face pale but composed. In his hand, a heavy battle spear slowly materialized, whose tip pulsed with pure, concentrated blue system mana. Even clear, the guiding vectors of his spear fighting style were traced in the air as perfect geometric rays. I don't know what kind of creature you are, Jin-woo said coldly, gripping the spear with both hands. But you are too dangerous for this sector. An anomaly's mark is subject to immediate elimination. He lunged. The spear shot forward at the speed of sound, creating a vacuum stream that instantly swept away all the snow between him and Siwoo. This was the S-rank skill, Void Piercing Ray. Siwoo thrust forward his granite-plated paws, attempting to block the blow, but the blue tip of the spear effortlessly pierced the stone, sinking deep into his ink flesh. Violet blood ink spattered onto Jin Woo's silver armor. Warning: critical damage received. Integrity of Shadow Fong. Form reduced to 42%. The boy wolf fell to one knee, breathing heavily. Black liquid dripped from his maw, while his right neon eye flickered convulsively, displaying system error symbols. Your animation is too slow, Wolf, Pak Jin Woo said quietly, beginning to slowly twist the spear in his wound, burning Siwoo's analog ink with system mana. You're just meat for leveling. Even clear. The end. Siwoo raised his left, human eye to the hunter. In that 7-year-old gaze, there was no fear of death. He had already died today. In that gaze was a bottomless, icy abyss of a being that had understood how this world worked. I heard that S-rank hunters are very proud of their flawless bodies, Siwoo whispered, and his paw clamped in a death grip around the spear's shaft, preventing Jin Woo from pulling it out. For what reason do you think your skin will not become my new canvas? Beneath Siwoo's eyes, the two black ink trails suddenly widened, completely flooding his face and neck. The black pigment of his wild blood palette crept up along the spear shaft, reaching toward Pak Jin Woo's fingers. Pak Jin Woo tried to unclench his fingers, but it was too late. Siwoo's black, oily ink moved not according to the laws of physics or hydraulics. It spread along the spear shaft like through veins, instantly reaching the hunter's palms. The S-rank's silver gauntlets immediately began to deteriorate, covered in dirty, rusty patina, while the skin beneath them hissed like an old analog television without a signal. What is this? What is this magic? Let go! Jin Woo lost his celebrated composure for the first time. His voice broke into a shout. He attempted to activate the system retreat skill wind step, but his legs, mired in Siwoo's ink trail, lost their grip on the rift's polygon grid. Movement vectors broke down. Even clear no longer worked. Chronic, Siwoo spat directly into the hunter's pale face. Your faith in system ranks is a chronic blindness. The boy wolf forcefully yanked the spear toward himself, driving the tip even deeper into his own shoulder to close the distance. At that same instant, his left free paw, weighted with the stone slug's granite shell, crashed on a Pak Jin Woo's chest with a thunderous sound. The blow was of such force that the S-rank's protective field burst with a dry, glassy sound. Jin Woo's silver breastplate caved inward, shattering ribs. The hunter spat out a fountain of bright red system mana, which in the air mixed with Siwoo's violet ink. But Siwoo had no intention of simply finishing him off. Warning: forced target structure analysis initiated object for copying. S-rank hunter class. Tracker tool stroke of form overloaded. Human genome detected. For what reason? Do you think you can remain human when I became a beast? Siwoo rasped. His black trails beneath his eyes pulsed, turning into thousands of thin, capillary threads that pierced directly into Pak Jin Woo's face through the shattered visor of his helmet. Siwoo began to literally drain from the hunter his graphical model, his skills, his S-rank structure. This was not merely the absorption of a monster's essence. This was erasure of identity. Jin Woo screamed wildly, but his cry quickly turned into an empty, digital rasp. His skin visibly lost color before one's eyes, turning into a flat, careless sketch made with a hard pencil. The lines of his face were erased, and his eyes filled with the white noise of the system. Within a few seconds, the body of the scout's leader crumbled into fine graphite dust, which the icy wind of the black forest instantly carried away. Target fully removed from the current layer texture acquired. Human outline S-rank skill acquired. Wind step distorted warning. First human form unlock available. The body of Siwoo, standing in the form of a massive wolf, began to tremble. The stone plates on his sides started to crack and fall away, turning into ordinary gray rocks. The charcoal fur receded beneath the skin, and the massive paws began to narrow, returning to human outlines. But this was not a return to the 7-year-old, frail body of Kinsi-woo. The ink cocoon that had enveloped him burst. From it, onto the snow-covered clearing, stepped a new figure. It was a young man appearing to be around 16 years old, the ideal middle age for a system combat unit. His body was lithe and muscular, dressed in a tattered, dark gray cloak woven from the remnants of shadow fog. His face was an exact but younger and sharper copy of Park Jin-woo's face. The same cheekbones, the same jawline. But there was one key distinction that revealed the monster within him. Beneath his eyes remained two deep, ink-black trails of ink that had eaten into the pale skin all the way to the flesh. In his right eye still burned with a toxic, hungry neon, within which a broken interface spun without cease. Siwoo looked at his new hands. He clenched and unclenched his fingers. The S-rank's power pulsed through his new magic channels. But this mana was no longer pure and blue. It was heavy, dark, and smelled of the dampness of the forest thicket. They didn't tell me, Jin-woo, that your body would be so convenient, Siwoo said. His voice now sounded clear, human, but within it still vibrated a low, wolfish undertone. The two remaining scouts, the crossbowman with the broken chest and the dagger wielder without weapons, watched this transformation with horror from their snowdrift. For them, what was happening lay beyond the limits of system logic. The monster had not simply killed their commander, it had put on his face. You, what are you? The dagger wielder babbled, retreating backward on all fours. A rift demon. Siwoo slowly turned his head toward them. His right neon eye locked onto their coordinates. In his new mind, where the human memory of a 7-year-old abandoned child had blended with the instincts of the Shadow Fong, there was no room for pity. These people had witnessed his mother leaving him here. They were part of her flawless world. Me? Siwoo took a light step forward. Skill activated. Wind step distorted. His figure instantly blurred in the air, leaving behind only a trail of black ink drops and dry pine needles. In that same microsecond, he was standing directly before the surviving scouts. His hand, turned into a semi-transparent black blade, froze a centimeter from the dagger wielder's throat. I'm the one you forgot to erase, Siwoo said quietly. And now I'm going to rewrite your entire guild, starting with this forest. At that moment, deep in the thicket of the rift, a deafening, rolling thunder rang out. The ground beneath their feet began to shake, and the leaden sky above the black forest turned crimson. This was a sign that the main boss of this dungeon, the ancient master of the thicket, had awakened, having sensed the death of his elite Shadow Fong and the anomalous distortion of the layers. Siwoo raised his gaze to the reddening sky. His right eye blinked furiously, calculating the new, colossal geometric lines that had begun to emerge through the trees. The crimson haze that had spread across the leaden sky was not an ordinary system effect of a rift phase change. It was a liquid, hot, erroneous texture, seeping directly from the cracks between the layers of the black forest. The ground beneath Siwoo's feet heaved, pushing outward gnarled, ancient roots that were visibly becoming covered with baked black bark resembling hardened slag. Warning: Territorial Sovereign Awakening Recorded Designation. Ancient Master of the Thicket rank. A mutated entire location entering mode. Layer lock / closed frame. The two surviving scouts of White Phoenix lost all will to resist. The dagger wielder, before whose throat Siwoo's semi-transparent ink blade still trembled, swallowed convulsively, staring into the neon right eye of his former commander. Commander Pak. No, monster. Let us go. He rasped, his interface above his head flickering in all colors of the rainbow, losing contact with the Association's satellites. If the Master of the Thicket has awakened, Lady Manhwa Jin will arrive here personally in 5 minutes with the main punitive squad. Kill us, and you won't have time to hide your outline. Siwu slowly lowered his hand. His new, 16-year-old face, copied from Pak Jin-woo, remained absolutely motionless, but the black ink trails beneath his eyes pulsed almost imperceptibly, as if absorbing the panic diffused in the frosty air. "For what reason do you think I want to hide my outline?" Siwu asked in a quiet but bone-chilling voice. "I only made this painting come alive for the sake of meeting her." He did not finish them off. Instead, he sharply turned his back to the scouts and took a wide, jagged step toward the crimson glow receding deep into the forest. Skill used. Wind step distorted, the frame blurred. His figure dissolved into ink drops and instantly reformed half a kilometer from the ravine at the very edge of the cemetery of ancient pines. Here the air was so dense with mana that breathing came with a crunch. Siwu's lungs, rebuilt to the analog code of the rift, perceived the system air as dry, hard graphite crumbs. Directly before him, something colossal was rising from the earth. The ancient master of the thicket had no distinct anthropomorphic form. It was a living canvas of centuries-old nightmare. A gigantic tangle of charred logs, the dead bodies of previous hunters stuck in its timber like failed sketches, and an enormous head made of thousands of writhing, bare branches. Instead of eyes, two colossal violet system letters burned in this monster. A. Even clear, the primary power marker. The creature noticed Siwu's approach. To it, he was neither human nor wolf. He was a foreign pigment, a blot that the rift's system order demanded be incinerated immediately. The master of the thicket let out a sound resembling the simultaneous creak of 1,000 breaking trees, and from a height of 30 meters, a colossal, heavy root paw capable of crushing an S-rank tank crashed down upon Siwu. Warning. Direct area attack launched. Vector hammer Siwu, using the speed of S-rank Pak Jin-woo, lurched to the side, but the attack's radius was too great. The falling root was compressing the very space around him, creating an invisible geometric frame around Siwu that prevented him from shifting along the X and Y axis. "Chronic," Siwu cried out, feeling his new human skin beginning to crack under the colossal pressure. "Your attachment to rigid frames is a chronic deformity." He did not jump. Instead, he drove both hands directly into the snow-covered earth, releasing all the accumulated essence of the stone slugs and the shadow fawn. Combined technique activated. Priming/granite mass, the ground around his feet instantly heaved upward, turning into a heavy, monolithic shield of gray granite covered in charcoal fur that absorbed the kinetic energy of the blow. The colossal root of the master of the thicket crashed into this shield with a thunderous sound. An explosion rang out, hurling tons of black earth and ice splinters into the air. The granite shield shattered into fragments. Siwu was thrown backward a good 30 meters. His cloak of shadow fog tore, and from his left shoulder spurted violet blood ink. Above his head, the interface blinked anxiously. Integrity of human outline form reduced to 68% warning. Partial exposure of the true frame detected. Siwu rose from his knees. On his face, copied from the tracker, the right half of the skin had peeled away, exposing beneath it the writhing, oily black mass for which a hungry, feral neon. I stared at the master of the thicket. "Your turn to be erased," Siwu rasped, and his voice finally split into 3 tones: a child's, a wolf's, and a human's. He broke into motion, using wind step distorted, not once, but in short, continuous cascades. One frame, he was to the left of the monster. The next frame, he was already flying up its colossal charred trunk, leaving jagged black marks on the creature's crimson bark behind him. The master of the thicket tried to shake him off, releasing from its body hundreds of small, sharp branches that moved like perfectly calibrated system arrows. Even clear, but Siwu was no longer dodging. Every arrow that pierced his body only increased the surface area of his palate. Where the branches pierced his flesh, they were immediately contaminated by his violet ink, losing their integrity and turning into rotting debris. Reaching the level of the monster's chest, where behind a layer of interwoven logs pulsed a massive system core the size of an automobile. An A-rank core. Siwoo swung his right hand back, his fingers elongated, transforming into a massive ink quill saturated with all the hatred of a child abandoned in the forest. "For what reason do you think your chapter cannot be concluded right now?" he cried out, driving his hand quill up to the elbow directly into the glowing core of the ancient master of the thicket. Tool activated. Full fill/rank inversion. The A-rank violet core froze for a moment. Then from the point of contact, heavy, oily black veins spread in all directions. The monster's systemic crimson light began to rapidly dim, replaced by the thick, impenetrable purple of the wild blood palette. The colossal tree began to sink. Its branches hung limply, and the dead bodies of hunters embedded within it began to dissolve, turning into pure, undistributed graphics that Siwoo greedily drew in through his neon eye. Absorption of the location's sovereign's essence. 12%. 34%. 56%. Warning. Approach of an external object of colossal power. Recorded rank of approaching object. At that very moment, the sky above the cemetery of ancient pines split in two with a dry, glassy crack. Directly from this golden spatial fissure, enveloped in blinding, pure orange flame, a woman descended upon the crumbling body of the master of the thicket. Minutes Ijin, his mother. Her long scarlet hair billowed in the artificial wind of the system, and in her hands blazed a giant two-handed sword that radiated such heat that all the snow within a kilometer radius instantly turned into dense steam. She did not even look down at Siwoo, who still held his hand inside the monster's core. Her icy eyes were directed exclusively at the rift's system readings. "Tracker pack," she asked coldly, noticing Siwoo's face half concealed by black ink. "For what reason have you not yet reported on the cleansing? And what is this filthy anomaly on the boss's body? Step aside. You are ruining my frame statistics. Even clear. Step aside, or I will incinerate you along with it." Siwoo slowly turned his head toward her. His left, human eye, the eye of a 7-year-old boy locked inside the body of a 16-year-old killer, met the gaze of the mother who had left him here to die exactly 4 hours ago. The ink trails beneath his eyes began to boil, turning into thick, suffocating smoke. The dense steam from the melting snow instantly filled all the space around the crumbling ancient master of the thicket. Through this white, damp veil, Manhwa Jin's orange flame broke through like a merciless, dead spotlight beam. She stood atop the charred trunk, flawless, majestic, holding her two-handed sword over her shoulder. For her, this rift was merely another line in the weekly report to the association. Another perfect brushstroke in her career as the leader of White Phoenix. She did not even recognize the voice. When Siwoo spoke, the sound came not from his human mouth, but from hundreds of cracks in the timber filled with his violet ink. Frame statistics, the guttural, broken whisper echoed. "For what reason do you always speak only of numbers, mother?" Manhwa Jin sharply raised her head. Her perfect eyebrows twitched, and her icy eyes narrowed, fixing on a figure of the 16-year-old young man with the face of her deceased tracker. But the system radar inside her S-rank interface had gone haywire. Instead of the clear blue marker of her ally pack Jin Woo, what pulsed before her was an enormous, shapeless blot of black noise that was literally consuming the polygons of the ancient master of the thicket. "Who are you?" Her voice cut through the steam like ringing steel. "You're not Pack Jinwoo. S-rank hunters are incapable of directly absorbing a location boss's essence." "And what did you just call me?" "Chronic." Siwoo took a step forward, pulling his hand quill from the monster's core. Together with his hand, a colossal fountain of black, oily ink erupted from the heart of the tree, instantly rushing into his body. The rendering process concluded ahead of schedule. Absorption of the location's sovereign's essence. 100% rank of your current structure elevated. C greater than B greater than A. Warning. Unique form component acquired. Nodes of the cursed tree. his 16-year-old body began to break apart and rearrange itself before her very eyes. There were no system special effects, only a dry, terrible crunch. From his back and shoulders, with a crack, burst heavy, sharp branches of charred black wood, which intertwined, forming a living, pulsing armor. The stone plates of the slugs merged into this timber, reinforcing it to the density of titanium. The black trails beneath Si Wu's eyes turned into deep, ink-seeping hollows, from which two different eyes stared at his mother. The left, full of human tears and a child's grievance, and the right, burning with the toxic, hungry neon of the system. Your illness, your blindness, it is chronic, Si Wu growled, and his figure grew taller than 3 meters, turning into a horrifying hybrid of human, wolf, and ancient forest. You left your son in a ravine because his mana did not meet your standards. You erased me from this canvas. But I came back, and I brought my own palette. Manhwa took half a step back, and her face, for the first time in many years, went pale. Not from fear of a monster. An S rank does not fear creatures. What shook her was the system information that finally broke through the interference of her interface. Warning. Genetic match detected with object. Can Si Wu status. Deleted current object status. Overriding system code / true author Si Wu. Her lips trembled, but in that same instant her face was locked once more in the habitual icy mask of an S-rank hunter's pride. No, my son was defective garbage. He had no core. You were simply a mental parasite of the rift that devoured his corpse and is trying to use his memories to unsettle my will. Even clear, this will not affect the launch of the cleansing protocol. She gripped her giant sword with both hands. The orange flame around her blazed with such force that the steam was instantly incinerated, and the earth within a 50-meter radius turned into bubbling, molten lava. Highest S-rank skill activated. Incinerating Phoenix sweep. Manhwa lurched forward. Her speed was beyond the limit. She moved outside the frame rate that Si Wu had been able to perceive before. The fiery trail from her sword traced in space a gigantic, perfect arc that was meant to cleave the body of her altered son in two and incinerate his very soul to the state of white ash. But Si Wu was no longer the frail child who had meekly waited for her in the snow. "Layer order change," he cried out in 3 voices simultaneously. His enormous hands, covered in charred bark and granite spikes, sharply struck the air before him, as if he were grabbing an invisible sheet. The space of the rift obediently groaned. Before the flying fiery blade of Manhwa, a colossal, heavy layer mask arose, a wall of pure, viscous black ink mixed with the ancient pines of the cemetery. A deafening explosion rang out. The S-rank orange flame crashed into the ink barrier of the A-rank. The sound of the impact resembled the roar of a tectonic shift. Hyjin's flame furiously burned through the ink, evaporating tons of analog pigment, but the density of the wild blood palette was infinite. In place of the burned layers, Si Wu instantly applied new ones, drawing them directly from the roots of the Black Forest. For what reason do you still think your magic is flawless? Si Wu burst through the flame and smoke toward his mother. His jagged, frame-by-frame movements created dozens of false silhouettes in space. One frame he was to the left, undercutting her fire trajectory with a wooden spike. The next frame he was above, bringing a granite hammer of his paw crashing down onto her golden armor. Manhwa, demonstrating S-rank combat experience, blocked each of his jagged lunges with exquisite precision. Her sword spun at furious speed, creating around her an impenetrable sphere of pure flame. Even clear, each of her blocks sent Si Wu flying backward, leaving deep, smoldering burns on his wooden armor. "You are nothing but an anomaly, a monster," she cried out, delivering a series of thrusting blows, each of which pierced Si Wu's granite plates and caused his violet blood to evaporate with a hiss. The system always deletes bugs. You cannot rewrite the order of this world. Warning. Integrity of true frame form reduced to 51% S-rank thermal damage received. Forced texture burnout initiated. Si-woo fell to his knees in the midst of the bubbling lava. His wooden armor had charred and cracked, and his left human hand began to thin again, turning into a pale, freezing sketch of a 7-year-old child. Manhwa-jin's flame was burning through his new ranks at a frightening speed. The S-rank's experience and power were too colossal for the rift he had just absorbed. Manhwa-jin slowly approached him, raising her sword for a final downward blow. Her face was cold as ice at the bottom of the deepest rift. "Even clear," she said quietly, aiming at his pulsing neon right eye. "In a session, Si-woo, if this truly was you, you should not have awakened." Si-woo raised his head. From his left eye rolled a black, oily tear, which instantly evaporated on his scorching cheek. But his right neon eye suddenly stopped blinking with errors. It froze, locking her sword, her armor, her face into one single, final point of composition. "They didn't tell you, Mother," he whispered, and a predatory, mad smile of an artist appeared on his ravaged face. "That when you burn away my layers, you simply make room for my main tool." He did not raise shields or dodge. Instead, he grabbed the blade of her falling fire sword with both hands. The flame instantly began turning his palms to ash, but Si-woo held on with a death grip. From his torn chest, directly from his human heart, burst a colossal, dense cord of absolutely black, pure primordial ink, the very same that had awakened him when he was dying in the snow. This was not mana. This was a pure refusal of the system. The black cord instantly coiled around Manhwa-jin's sword, crawled up her arms, biting into the golden armor and contaminating her orange flame with dirty, analog soot. The system inside her head let out a deafening wail. "Critical error. Viral script detected. Author's ink. Your system skills are blocked for 180 seconds. Target Manhwa-jin's rank temporarily reduced." Her flame went out. The blinding golden armor began to become covered in rust and cracks, and her perfect face contorted with genuine, human terror. She tried to wrench the sword away, but Si-woo was already rising from his knees, drawing her with him into the very center of the undrying ink blot that this sector of the Black Forest was turning into. The golden radiance of the S rank, which a moment ago had seemed an unbreakable dome, finally choked in the viscous purple. For the first time in her life, Manhwa-jin felt her perfect, honed-to-automaticity system channels becoming clogged with something thick, warm, and utterly alien. This was not blood magic, not a necromancer's curse. It was raw, analog carbon, a primordial pigment that was erasing her very digital essence. "Let go, defective creature. Let go of my sword." Her voice lost its former, icy monotony. It was cut through by the high, panicked tone of an ordinary woman whose perfect picture of the world was being flooded with ink at this very moment. Si-woo did not let go. His fingers, burned to the bone and covered in a layer of fused graphite, had welded themselves permanently to the scorching steel. He felt how, through the weapon, her fury, her status, her years of combat experience were pouring into his structure. But instead of copying her form, as he had done with the tracker, his palette began to crudely break apart and chew through her parameters. Warning. Resistance of S-rank carrier detected, forced layer synchronization initiated, mother, and rejected fruit, recalculating balance of forces. "For what reason are you screaming, guild leader?" Si-woo made a sharp forward motion of his head, and his wooden shoulder spikes dug into Hai-jin's golden pauldrons with a dry crack, striking a fountain of gray soot. "You yourself taught me that on the battlefield only the one with the denser outline survives. Even clear, look at me. Look at what you sketched out in that ravine." With these words, his right neon eye expanded to its limit, projecting a system malfunction directly onto Manhwa-jin's retina. Before her eyes flashed scraps of erased logs, a freezing 7-year-old boy, an empty coffee cup on the dashboard of her elite car, the receding footsteps of her boots on the crunching crust, and over all of it, a thick, ugly black blot that was now spreading inside her own interface. Hai-jin, Realizing that the skill blockade had stripped her of range, sharply released the hilt of her sword. Leaving the legendary weapon in her son's hands, she delivered a lightning-fast strike with her left palm directly into the open, ink-covered part of Siwoo's face. Even without mana, the S-rank's physical strength was colossal. Her fist pierced the charred bark, breaking the boy monster's jaw and sending him staggering 3 steps back. But Siwoo did not fall. The broken jaw immediately closed up with ragged threads of violet ink, returning the bones to place with a creak. Chronic, he spat along with a thick clot of ink blood. Your desire to control every frame is a chronic madness. Using wind step distorted, Siwoo instantly closed the distance, but this time his figure did not simply blur. It split into 5 independent graphic outlines. 5 3-meter timber granite monsters simultaneously raised their heavy paws over Manhwa. The S-rank huntress, stripped of magic, trusted her flawless reflexes. She dodged the first blow, letting a stone spike pass a millimeter from her ear, rolled under the second outline, and with a precise kick destroyed the knee joint of the third phantom. Even clear, calculation of animation timings. She moved like a perfect elimination machine, even at the epicenter of a viral malfunction. But the 4th and 5th outlines of Siwoo were a trap. They had no intention of striking. At the moment when Hygiene completed her role, the 2 phantom ink figures beneath her feet suddenly lost volume, turning into flat puddles of liquid ink on the molten lava. The ground beneath the huntress instantly lost its physical properties of a solid body. Tool applied. Canvas liquefaction / rotten swamp. Manhwa sank up to her hips in the viscous, heavy black sludge, which immediately began to harden, turning into monolithic charcoal that locked her movements. She was trapped in the canvas like an unfinished sketch. Siwoo walked slowly toward her. The real Siwoo. His left human eye looked at his mother stuck in the ink with a deep, bottomless exhaustion in which there was no longer any childish hope. There was only cold, calibrated geometry of revenge. He raised her own golden sword, which was now completely desecrated, its blade covered in rusty growths, and instead of orange flame, heavy drops of rank violet mana lazily dripped along it. They didn't tell me at the association, Siwoo said quietly, placing the tip of the sword against her unprotected neck, where beneath the broken collar of her armor a thin vein pulsed. How many experience points are awarded for erasing an S rank? But I think it will be enough to step beyond the borders of your little kingdom of 3 guilds. Manhwa froze, feeling the cold of the rusty steel against her skin. Her breathing was heavy, her scarlet hair matted with sweat and black soot. She raised her eyes to her altered son, and in her gaze for the first time throughout the entire battle, something resembling recognition emerged. But this was not a mother's remorse. This was the cold calculation of a guild leader who had seen before her a truly valuable, if dangerous, resource. You have truly grown stronger, Siwoo, she said through clenched teeth, while her fingers inside the ink trap quietly felled out an emergency system teleportation scroll in her belt pocket. Your defect turned out to be a hidden author class. Come back with me to Seoul. I will give you a rank. I will give you a name. We will erase the Typhoon Guild and rewrite the balance of power in Korea. Even clear, that is what you want, isn't it? Siwoo froze. His right neon eye blinked furiously, reading her hidden intentions. A red line from her hand was already stretching toward the magic scroll on her belt. The scroll pulsed with the golden mana of a preparing spatial jump. She was lying. She was simply stalling for time while the skill blockade timer moved relentlessly toward 0. Time remaining until target's system's skill blockade ends. 12 seconds. The smile on Siwoo's face slowly melted away, giving way to a deathly graphite pallor. His right neon pupil completed a full rotation, and the system timer hanging above Manhwa's head froze for a moment. Time remaining until blockade ends. 7 seconds. Even clear, he echoed her favorite phrase, but in his delivery, it sounded like a verdict on a broken record player. For what reason do you still think I need your name, Mother? You gave me the name Can Si Woo, and with that name, I died in a snowdrift to the sound of your elite boots. His left hand, the very one that had thinned to a pencil sketch, sharply darted downward. The speed of this movement was jagged, stripped of smooth animation frames. His palm simply vanished at one point in space and materialized at another, locking dead on Min Hai-jin's wrist at the very moment her fingers touched the golden scroll of the emergency teleport. A dry, hideous crack rang out. Si Woo crushed her wrist with A-rank force weighted by the slug's granite shell. The S-rank huntress's fingers went limp, and the scroll, covered in violet ink, instantly rotted, turning into a heap of wet gray ash. The scroll, my only, Hai-jin choked, her icy mask finally shattering, exposing the primal, feral terror before the creature standing over her. Time remaining until blockade ends. 3 seconds. 2 seconds. Now the outline is closed, Si Woo said quietly. He did not strike her with the sword. He threw the desecrated golden blade directly into the bubbling lava, where it began to dissolve with a hiss. Instead, Si Woo bore down on her from above, driving his heavy, wooden root paws that had grown from his shoulders deep into the scorching slag on either side of her head. From his palms, from the pores of his face, from every crack in his timber granite armor, poured terabytes of raw, unfiltered black ink. It was an entire avalanche of analog noise that began flooding Min Hai-jin, seeping under her broken breastplate, filling her mouth, eyes, and ears. Your entire guild, your entire soul, your entire system. Si Woo whispered directly into her face as the ink slowly consumed her scarlet hair. You are all merely sketches on my new paper, and I have just picked up the eraser. Target skill blockade complete. Warning. S-rank huntress Min Hai-jin is attempting to activate passive skill. Phoenix second birth deep within her chest, where a flawless, gleaming S-core resided, a tiny but impossibly dense point of white fire ignited. This was an absolute defense, a passive skill that triggered under mortal threat and was meant to incinerate everything living within a 3-kilometer radius, fully regenerating the body of its owner. But Si Woo's black ink moved faster than system triggers. It acted at the level of the very canvas upon which those triggers were written. Merge visible layers. Color inversion. Si Woo commanded in 3 voices. Hidden subskill activated. Negative/fading. That white point of fire, which should have exploded into cleansing flame, suddenly changed its spectrum under the influence of Si Woo's ink. It became absolutely black, absorbing light and heat instead of radiating them. Instead of a colossal outward explosion, there was a quiet, vacuum implosion inward. Min Hai-jin opened her eyes wide, but there were no longer any pupils in them. Only endless rows of system code that were rapidly being erased, replaced by empty white fields. Her body beneath, Si Woo began to rapidly lose volume and weight. The golden armor turned into flat gray lines drawn hastily, and her face became a careless, blurred sketch that lazily dissolved in the violet sludge of the rift. She did not die in the ordinary sense of the system. She ceased to exist at the level of the geometry of this world. Absorption of S-rank structure, 7%, 22%, 45%. Warning, your current capacity is overloaded. The human vessel is unstable. Critical influx of high-rank mana detected. Si Woo's body was pierced by a convulsion unlike any before. The power of his mother's S-rank was so enormous that his 3-meter form of charred wood and stone began to literally crack at the seams. From his chest burst blinding rays of black, inverted flame, which tore centuries-old pines out by the roots and turned the rocks into liquid glass. Beneath Si Woo's eyes, the ragged ink trails burst, and from them poured genuine resin, completely flooding his neck, chest, and arms. His human appearance of a 16-year-old young man began to melt, exposing beneath it the true frame. A creature woven entirely from dark, pulsing lines of intent and white noise. At that moment, when the figure of Manhwa Jin had dissolved to 80%, turning into a barely visible pencil silhouette, the sky above the black forest shuddered from a new sound. This was not the rift. This was the global system announcer, thundering across the entire Korean server. Warning: decline in vital indicators of White Phoenix Guild leader Manhwa Jin recorded status. Critical anomaly/threat of carrier erasure. Emergency punitive core of the Hunter Association dispatched to Sector Black Forest. Estimated time of arrival: 3 minutes. Si-woo breathed heavily, his right neon eye spinning at such speed that a small vacuum vortex formed around it. He felt dozens of powerful gold and blue markers already converging on the rift's borders. The association's elite, punishers who were coming to eliminate the bug. He looked at his hands, which now consisted of intertwined black branches seeping with rank violet mana, and at the remnants of his mother's silhouette beneath his feet. 3 minutes. Si-woo rasped, and the Shadow Fong's snarl emerged again on his broken face. Just enough to finish this sketch and prepare the canvas for their arrival. 3 minutes. For the system, a negligibly small span of time, barely enough for a buff animation to refresh. For Si-woo, a whole eternity within which every frame could be broken down into individual pixels. The remnants of Manhwa Jin's pencil silhouette were finally absorbed into his right palm. The last log of her S rank dissolved into his wild blood palette, leaving behind only the bitter aftertaste of burned ozone and dry graphite. Absorption of S rank structure complete. 100% warning. Your core is overloaded. Emergency discharge of excess graphics. Initiated global location modification available. Black Forest Ink abode. Si-woo's body arched backward, unable to withstand the colossal pressure of the foreign mana. The timber granite armor on his chest burst, and from within it, like from a breached dam, poured the surpluses of the absorbed energy. But they did not dissipate into the air. The pure, inverted black S-rank mana rolled in heavy, oily waves across the snow-covered clearing, instantly rewriting the textures of everything it touched. The white snow of the rift visibly lost its texture, turning into the perfectly smooth, gleaming whiteness of expensive textured paper. The centuries-old pines, charred by the phoenix's flame, froze, their silhouettes elongated, thinned, and turned into sharp, angular strokes made with ink on a white background. The rocks behind Si-woo lost their volume, becoming flat backdrops drawn with a hard pencil. The entire location, with a radius of 3 kilometers, lost its system rendering within a couple of minutes. Even clear, the space turned into a gigantic, two-dimensional comic, where the only living, volumetric, and colorful object was Si-woo himself. His figure finally stabilized. He was no longer a 3-meter wooden monster. The S-rank power compressed his form, returning him to the appearance of a 16-year-old young man. But now his skin bore the sheen of noble matte graphite. The tattered cloak was woven from hundreds of the finest ink lines that moved continuously, like living sketches. On his face, absolutely clean and white, like a primed canvas. Only the right neon eye burned, and beneath both eyes deep, glossy black trails had hardened. Location modification complete. Status acquired. Master of the Ink abode rank. S. Hidden. All system laws within the abode are subordinate to your palette at that same instant. At the very edge of the rewritten forest, space cracked with a dry snap. The gold and blue markers of the association's punitive core burst into the location. There were about 30 of them. The best raiders of Seoul, clad in heavy, gleaming armor, with swords and staffs saturated with the system's legitimate mana. The squad was led by the vice-chairman of the association S-rank hunter, Kim Tae-hyun. Class, Magister of Order. But the moment their boots stepped onto the territory of the Ink abode, their perfect, smooth system animation abruptly cut out. Their movements became jerky, jagged, as if they were moving at a rate of 5 frames per second. The golden glow of their weapons instantly faded, turning into a washed-out, careless yellow hatching. What's happened to the interface? Cried one of the forward assault troops, looking at his hands, which were visibly losing polygons and becoming flat. My rank is dropping. The system can't see the server. Kinte Hyen stopped, breathing heavily. His heavy staff, capable of summoning meteor showers, inside this abode looked like an ordinary stick wrapped in dirty electrical tape. He raised his left eye and, through the flat, drawn branches of the trees, he saw Si Wu. The drawn boy was sitting on a flat granite boulder, lazily swinging his leg. In his hand was clasped a broken arrow, whose tip he was dipping into the ink seeping from his own shoulder. "You, what did you do to Min Hygiene?" The vice chairman's voice rang out dully, without the usual system resonance. "Who gave you the right to rewrite the code of the rift?" Siwu slowly raised his head. His right neon pupil made a short, predatory rotation, fixing the coordinates of 30 new targets. For him, they were no longer great hunters or association punishers. They were simply a group of ugly, extraneous brushstrokes on his immaculately white, clean sheet. "Chronic," Siwu said quietly, and his voice was woven directly into the punishers' heads in the form of thick black subtitles. "Your belief that the association can control the author, that is a chronic stupidity. You came to erase me?" Even clear, he rose from the boulder, and the tattered cloak behind his back swept upward, turning into a colossal cloud of black splatter. "For what reason did you decide that this canvas belongs to you?" Si Wu asked, taking a first step toward the punitive core. "My first chapter is finished. Let's begin the second." From a clean sheet, the ink lines beneath his feet clung to the hunter's boots, and the abode prepared to absorb its new paint. 30 elite hunters froze on the flat, white paper of the location, like flies in undried lacquer. Kante Hyen, the association's vice chairman, felt his century of experience, fixed by the system in the form of flawless passive S-rank skills, turning into useless, blocked garbage inside this ink abode. His staff scepter of world order no longer relayed commands to the server. The guiding geometric lines of his Magister of Order class broke apart the moment they touched the two-dimensional pines. "Spread out." Tae Hyen barked hoarsely, but his voice rang flat, without its customary system resonance. "This is not just a rift. It is a spatial distortion of the highest order. Attack the creature's outline. Move." Even clear, the command was given by all the rules of punitive core tactics. But the punishers could not move from the spot. Ink lines, stretching from the flat ground, had permanently stitched their drawn boots to the texture of the white sheet. The two A-rank assault troops who attempted to lunge forward using physical force watched in horror as their legs below the knee simply lost volume, turning into flat black strokes on the paper. Siwu took a smooth, fluid step forward. His 16-year-old graphite figure glided across the abode's white canvas without a single sound. In his right hand, enveloped in the smoke of his absorbed mother's S-rank, a new tool slowly took shape. A long, jagged blade woven from the charred branches of the ancient master of the thicket and the lead letters of the system. "I heard," Siwu said quietly, and his words instantly appeared on the white sky as ragged black hieroglyphs. "I heard that the Hunter Association considers itself the author of this world. You think that if you arranged ranks from F to S, the picture is finished." One of the mages of the punitive core, overcoming the frame lag, nonetheless managed to raise his flat, pencil staff. From its tip, instead of the usual three-dimensional fireball, shot a careless, faded yellow blot, a distorted skill supernova burst. It flew slowly, jerking and leaving behind a trail of broken pixels. Siwu did not even raise his blade. He simply turned his head slightly, and his left human eye, full of icy contempt, locked onto the incoming attack. Tool applied. Eraser/fragment deletion, directly in the air before Siwu, an invisible but tangible erasure strip appeared. The mage's yellow blot, barely touching this boundary, instantly turned white, lost its pigment, and dissolved without a trace, restoring the original sterile whiteness to the space. The mage who had cast the spell convulsively clutched his throat. His own system interface above his head had been erased halfway, leaving only an empty gray frame without a name or level. Chronic, Siwoo growled, and his figure instantly blurred. Skill activated. Wind step distorted S rank. 1 frame. Siwoo vanishes from the boulder. The next frame, 3 forward A rank assault troops simultaneously receive deep, ragged cuts across their flat armor. From their wounds sprang not red blood, but thick violet ink, which immediately began flooding their silver elements, corroding the metal like a powerful acid. The hunters cried out, but their cries turned into broken digital noise. Their graphic models collapsed before one's eyes. Arms turned into chaotic lines, faces smeared as if wiped by a wet finger. Kante Hyen, watching his elite squad being destroyed without a single chance to block, snarled with impotence. His right hand, still gripping the staff, filled with heavy, forced order mana. He used his last, secret scroll, Absolute Equalization. This was a power that temporarily restored system laws within its area of effect, forcing the canvas to become three-dimensional again. Come back within the frame, monster! Tae-Hyen cried out, smashing his staff against the ground. From the point of impact, a powerful blue wave of three-dimensional polygons surged in all directions. The abode's white paper began to crack, dirty snow, stone textures, and the volumetric trunks of pines re-emerging beneath it. The Punisher's movements momentarily regained their former smoothness, 60 frames per second, and their ranks flared with their former golden light. Even clear, the space attempted to restructure itself back under the Association's dictate. The Blue Order wave struck Siwoo, causing his graphite body to crack deeply. His tattered cloak of lines froze, and his right neon eye flickered convulsively, issuing warnings of forced synchronization. Warning: external location formatting detected. Your author rank temporarily suppressed by S-class system logic. Current form stability, 44%. Kante Hyen, losing not a second, lunged forward. His speed was colossal. The staff in his hands turned once more into a gleaming mithril blade, whose tip was aimed squarely at the violet core in Siwoo's chest. For what reason did you decide that a single bug can defeat the entire system? Can Siwoo? The vice chairman roared, delivering a crushing lunge. Your mother was right. Defects must be disposed of. Even clear, the end. Tae-Hyen's blue blade effortlessly pierced the defensive layers of ink fog and plunged deep into Siwoo's right shoulder, striking showers of sparks and causing the boy monster to stagger. The powerful systemic order mana began incinerating the analog ink within his magic channels, turning them into dry, dead sand. Siwoo fell to one knee. His left, human hand again became the thin, freezing palm of a 7-year-old child left in the forest. Thick black resin dripped from his mouth, and his right eye had nearly gone completely dark under the pressure of the blue light of order. The Punishers around him raised their weapons, ready to deliver a final, simultaneous area strike to completely erase the remains of the anomaly. Even clear, 30 blades and spells were trained on a single point of the composition. Tae-Hyen stood over him, breathing heavily, his face expressing the cold triumph of an executor who had carried out the cleansing protocol. It is over, the S-rank said quietly, twisting the blade in his shoulder. Siwoo slowly raised his head. Through the broken, ink-dripping jaw on his graphite face, a hideous, ragged smile appeared. His left human eye looked at Tae-Hyen with such bottomless, ancient hatred that the vice chairman involuntarily froze, feeling an icy sweat run down his back. They didn't tell you at your association, Siwoo whispered, and his ruined hand clamped in a death grip around the gleaming blade of Tae-Hyen's sword. That when you try to align the canvas by your grid, you only make its lines more brittle. Beneath his nails, within the capillaries of his graphite body, the violet pigment of the wild blood flared with a new, unseen force, consuming the blue order mana from within the very weapon of Tae-Hyen. The blue order mana, seeping from the vice chairman's blade, began to rapidly change its color. The system's flawless azure neon became contaminated, covered in heavy, oily streaks of violet and black ink. Kante Hyen tried to wrench his weapon free, but Siwoo's fingers seemed to have permanently fused with the steel of the S-rank blade. What the? Where is this density coming from? Tae Hyen snarled, feeling his own stamina bar begin to empty sharply, as if what was being drawn out were not merely mana points, but the very graphic foundation of his existence. Warning: critical error in forced formatting detected. Tool absolute equalization is encountering an infinite palette process initiated. Compositional explosion / rollback to sketch. The blue order wave that had just restored the three-dimensional snow and volumetric pines suddenly froze. The space around them lurched like a torn strip of film. The textures began to flicker chaotically. One frame, cold snow beneath their feet. The next frame, an absolutely white, smooth sheet of paper. And with each such flicker, the association's blue color yielded to Siwoo's primordial black pigment. For what reason did you decide that you can dictate terms to the author? Siwoo rasped. His broken jaw finally fused shut, and from the deep hollows beneath his eyes poured such a dense stream of ink that it instantly flooded all the molten lava beneath their feet, turning the battlefield into a boundless, mirror-black lake of undrying paint. Siwoo sharply jerked his left hand upward. His fingers, transformed into 5 sharp, graphite quills, drove forcefully directly into the unprotected knee of Kante Hyen. The vice chairman, despite his colossal S-rank defense, cried out in pain. Siwoo's ink operated bypassing health points, dissolving the very vector model of his leg. Tae Hyen's right leg instantly lost volume, turning into a flat, careless sketch drawn with thick charcoal. Balance was lost. The Magister of Order swayed and crashed to one knee directly into the mirror ink sludge. Chronic, Siwoo cried out, and his figure again began to rapidly increase in size, absorbing the distorted mana of the 30 frozen punishers around him. Your association, your laws, your ranks, they're chronic soot on the body of a living world. 30 A-rank punishers, seeing their leader defeated, attempted to activate their most powerful group spells. Mages raised their staffs, assault troops lifted their swords, forming a global system network punishing palm of the system. Above the ink abode, a colossal, gold-gleaming blade of pure program code began to materialize, aimed at Siwoo's head. Even clear, the projection of absolute deletion. But Siwoo did not even glance at the golden system sword falling from the sky. He seized Tae Hyen's desecrated blade with both hands, drove it deep into the ink lake beneath his feet, and forcefully rotated it clockwise, as if mixing paints on a palette before beginning a new painting. Global tool activated. Outline blur / blending. The mirror-black surface of a lake beneath them instantly erupted in colossal, concentric circles. The entire geometry of the location finally went haywire. The golden system sword falling from the sky, barely reaching the level of the flat pine's treetops, suddenly began to blur at the edges. Its perfect geometric angles melted, turning into liquid, dirty yellow streams that dripped helplessly onto the white paper of the ground. 30 A-rank punishers let out a simultaneous, choking cry. The ink lake began to suck them inside the canvas. Their silver armor, their helmets, their weapons, all of it rapidly lost color and volume, turning into chaotic, dirty brushstrokes in the margins of someone else's rough draft. They were not simply dying, they were becoming part of the background elements that Siwoo used to reinforce the borders of his abode. Warning: A-rank combat units destroyed. 30/30ths all absorbed graphics redirected to workspace expansion current rank of the ink abode. S+ distorted reality, Kante Hyen remained alone. His once magnificent mithril armor now looked like a tattered, gray cardboard frame. Half of his face had been erased by the abode's eraser, exposing in place of an eye and cheek an empty, white texture without a single pixel. He breathed heavily, looking at Siwoo, who now towered over him. From the boy monster's back had grown colossal, heavy wings, woven from millions of the finest graphite lines, and the feathers of the ancient master of the thicket. Every movement of these wings left heavy black streaks in the air. You won't be able to hold this layer. Tae Hien rasped, his surviving eye spinning wildly, trying to find even a single working system command. The association will send here 3 national ranks. They will scrape you off. Like mold. Even. Clear. Siwoo slowly leaned toward him. On his graphite face, where only one left, human eye of a 7-year-old child remained, locked in the body of a merciless god of ink, an expression of absolute, chilling calm had settled. They didn't tell you, Vice Chairman, Siwoo said quietly, almost gently, and his enormous ink palm softly rested on top of Tae Hien's head. That national ranks are simply more expensive markers in the hands of the same publisher. And I'm not at war with the markers. I came to break the hand that holds them. His fingers closed. Pure, concentrated primordial ink poured into the head of the Punisher's leader, completely erasing the remnants of his S-rank. Absorption of S-rank structure, 100% warning. Hidden association log discovered. Coordinates of Soul's central server. Do you wish to plot a vector line to the next target? Siwoo straightened to his full height in the midst of his ink abode, which now stretched for dozens of kilometers in all directions, having completely absorbed the Black Forest Rift. The sky above him was absolutely white, the ground mirror black, and in place of the horizon stretched a single, thick horizon line drawn in ink. He looked in the direction where, beyond the borders of this rewritten canvas, Seoul lay. That very city where 3 great guilds divided power, and the association crossed defective children off the lists of the living. His violet veins beneath the graphite skin pulsed with renewed force. He felt every coordinate of their perfect high-rises, every pixel of their protective barriers. The abode's mirror black lake slowly calmed, turning into a flawless, glossy monolith. Tae Hien, the association's vice chairman, dissolved without a trace. The last stroke of his gray cardboard armor absorbed into the ink, leaving on the white paper of the ground only a tiny, barely visible dot. A coordinate. Hidden log discovered. Central server of the Hunter Association, Seoul, Jeonyo District. Do you wish to apply the direct vector tool to relocate? Siwoo stood motionless. His enormous graphite wings, woven from millions of the finest, vibrating lines, slowly descended, folding behind his back like a heavy cloak soaked in rain. His 16-year-old face still remained a primed white canvas, upon which only the seeping black trails beneath his eyes stood out, and the single right eye burning with toxic neon. The Kingdom of Hunters rested on 3 guilds. White Phoenix had already been deprived of its S-rank leader, but 2 remained, Typhoon and Blackhammer, and, of course, the association itself, a rigid, digitized framework that held this false reality from collapse. He had been only 7 years old when they abandoned him in the forest. But now, possessing the power of 2 absorbed S-ranks and an entire rift, he felt older than those centuries-old pines he had turned into flat pencil sketches. Heard, from beyond the borders of his ink abode, through the thick horizon line, came a distant, barely perceptible hum. It was not the sound of wind. It was the vibration of millions of system interfaces belonging to the residents of Seoul. The entire city was right now receiving emergency notifications about the complete destruction of the punitive core and the disappearance of the vice chairman. Even clear, red panic flags were lighting up on the screens of millions of smartphones and association consoles. Chronic, they had said, inability to meet the standards. Enter, Siwoo said quietly. His voice, split into a child's whisper and the shadow fawn's guttural growl, caused the mirror surface of the lake to ripple. He did not use system portals or relocation scrolls. He simply raised his right hand, which now ended in 5 razor-sharp graphite quills, and forcefully drew them through the air before him, as if slashing through a taut canvas with a palette knife. Tool activated. Layer incision slash through vector. The white sky of the ink abode tore from top to bottom with a deafening, papery crack. Through the resulting ragged slit instantly poured the sounds and smells of the real world. The roar of car sirens, the smell of scorching asphalt, the neon reflections of advertising billboards in Gangnam and Jongno. Directly through the hole, in his perfect two-dimensional reality, was visible the colossal, 50-story building of the Hunter Association, gleaming with flawless blue protective barriers. Siwoo took a step forward and simply fell into this slit, allowing the ink abode to fold behind his back into a dense, compact roll. He materialized directly on the rooftop of a 30-story shopping center located exactly opposite the association's main building. The city below was seething. Armored vehicles of the association stood in the streets. A-rank hunters were frantically forming defensive lines, and above the association's roof rotated a gigantic, three-dimensional system radar eye of the all-seeing order. The moment Siwoo appeared, this colossal blue radar sharply turned in his direction. Warning: source of zero-level system, threat detected. Threat rank: national, mutated engage protocol. Force frame disposal. Immediately from three sides, heavy golden security, searchlight beams crashed down onto the rooftop where Siwoo stood. The air around him instantly began to boil. The system was trying to fix his coordinates along the X, Y, and Z axes in order to impose a global suppression spell upon him. But Siwoo no longer obeyed the geometry of the three-dimensional world. For what reason do you think your searchlights can illuminate what has not yet been drawn? He asked quietly. Skill used. Wind step distorted S plus rank. His figure did not simply shift from its position. It disintegrated into a wide, chaotic blot of ink fog that instantly covered the entire shopping center rooftop. The association's golden searchlight beams, crashing into this oily darkness, began to pale, become covered in gray spots, and go dark, as if dirty turpentine had been splashed onto the lenses of the devices. At that moment, from the association's main entrance, directly through the air using magic platforms, two figures hurtled toward him. They wore heavy, close-fitting armor of black mithril bearing the emblem of the Black Hammer Guild. Above their heads burned interfaces. National Rank Hunter, Cho Mu-hyun. Class, Earth Titan and National Rank Hunter, Lee So-yun. Class, Ghostblade. The two most powerful hunters in the country, whose combined force could shift tectonic plates and cut through S-rank rifts with a single blow. Whatever kind of creature you are, the voice of Cho Mu-hyun thundered across the streets of Seoul, his gigantic stone hammer filling with such dense brown mana that the air around it cracked. You made a mistake coming to our sector. Even clear. Here, it is we who defend this system. Lee So-yun wasted no words on conversation. Her figure turned into a transparent, razor-sharp vector that shot at the speed of light directly towards Siwoo's neck. Her skill, Absolute Coordinate / ignored any physical or magical armor. The two national ranks simultaneously caught Siwoo in perfect crossfire. From above, crashed a hammer capable of reducing a skyscraper to dust. From the side flew a blade cutting through the very fabric of space. Even clear, a finale for any monster. Siwoo raised his left, human eye to the approaching gods of this digitized world. In a memory of his 7-year-old self rose his mother's words about how national ranks were the highest point of evolution, before which one must bow one's knees. They didn't tell me, he whispered, and his tattered cloak of graphite lines behind his back opened, turning into two colossal black arms. They didn't tell me that your highest points are so easily erased by an ordinary eraser. He thrust both arms forward to meet the two greatest attacks of humanity. The colossal stone hammer of Cho Mu-hyun, enveloped in dense brown mana, and the razor-sharp vector of Lee So-yun converged at the single point where Siwoo's neck had been a moment before. The blow of the national ranks should have produced a vacuum explosion capable of leveling half the Jongno district. But no sound followed. Instead of a deafening crash, there came a dry, viscous slap, as if two heavy objects at full speed had plunged into a barrel of liquid tar. The two gigantic black wing arms that had grown from Siwoo's back met the attacks of the greatest hunters head-on. Mu Haiyan's stone hammer became mired in the graphite lines of Si Wu's left arm. The ancient earth mana, capable of crumbling tectonic plates, began to rapidly absorb into the black mass, coloring it a dirty gray, but dealing Si Wu not a single point of damage. On the contrary, the hammer's weight began to drop rapidly. The system inside the Titan's weapon was simply losing data about the object's mass. Critical malfunction. Tool weight corrupted object, earth hammer switch to mode. Flat outline, / no weight, my mana. My hammer. It's become light as paper. Mu Haiyan stared wildly, trying to hold his balance, but his gigantic figure, stripped of its system anchor point, swayed. At that same instant, Si Wu's right black arm met Lee So-yun's absolute coordinate slash. Her transparent blade entered the ink fog, but instead of cutting through the boy's flesh, the blade simply became stuck between the X and Y axes. The space around her arm became covered in a thick, glossy black frame. Chronic, Si Wu spat, and his right neon eye blazed with such force that Lee So-yun was momentarily blinded. Your speed is a chronic illusion of superiority. Si Wu did not use a weapon. He simply sharply clenched both his enormous graphite palms, catching the national ranks in a dead, titanic vice. Tool activated. Layer merge / position lock. Lee So-yun attempted to activate her passive skill Phantom Departure to turn her body into intangible mana and slip through the monster's fingers. But Si Wu's ink had already penetrated her channels. Her ghost form froze halfway. The upper half of her body remained three-dimensional and human, while the lower half turned into a flat, careless ink sketch permanently adhered to the concrete rooftop of the shopping center. Mu Haiyan, fall back. He's blocking system calls, she shouted, but her voice was already doubling, shifting into a broken digital pixel rasp. Mu Haiyan, realizing they were being drawn into a trap, released the hilt of his devalued hammer and attempted to deliver a punch directly to Si Wu's chest, where through the ragged graphite lines pulsed the absorbed S-core of his mother. I am a Titan. I cannot be erased, he bellowed, activating his absolute enhancement wrath of Gaia. His fist, enlarged to the size of an automobile and covered in a titanium crust, slammed into Si Wu's chest with full force. A dull, analog crack rang out. Si Wu's timber granite armor broke into deep radial cracks, and from his mouth poured a dense stream of resin that completely flooded the golden epaulets of Mu Haiyan's armor. Warning: physical damage from national rank. Received your form stability reduced to 72%. Si Wu swayed, but as single human, I remained absolutely motionless. Reflected in its depths was the flawless blue neon sign of the Hunter Association building, located no more than 100 meters from them. You shout so loudly about your ranks, Si Wu said quietly, and his black trails beneath his eyes began to boil, turning into thousands of tiny, sharp graphite needles that shot directly into Mu Haiyan's face through the gaps in his helmet. For what reason did you decide that national ranks are the limit? Who drew your boundaries? The publisher? The ink needles sank into the Titan's skin. Mu Haiyan let out a deafening, guttural roar, but that sound quickly choked off as Si Wu's black ink began filling his lungs, erasing his system parameters from within. His golden buffs began to extinguish one by one, like burning out light bulbs in an old corridor. Even clear, discharge after discharge. Absorption of national rank essence Earth Titan, 14%. 38%. Absorption of national rank essence Ghost Blade, 11%. 29%. Lee So-yun, whose body had already half dissolved into the canvas of the rooftop, raised her head with the last of her strength. Her eyes, full of terror, were fixed on the gigantic blue radar above the Association building eye of the All-Seeing Order. Launch the protocol, she rasped into her built-in communicator. Erase the entire Jonyo sector. Together. With us. Even. Clear. Above the roof of the Hunter Association, the gigantic blue radar suddenly stopped rotating. It froze, directing its colossal neon pupil directly at the rooftop of the shopping center, where Siwoo held the two best defenders of humanity. The golden and blue radiance around the association building compressed to the size of a single, impossibly dense point at the top of the spire. Warning: Hunter Association activating final system weapon. Recycle bin purge / absolute zero blast radius. 5 kilometers. All object within the zone will be irrevocably deleted from the server database. Siwoo felt the air around him beginning to freeze rapidly. But this was not the rift cold from which he had nearly died at age 7. This was the cold of complete digital non-existence, destroying even the very paper upon which the sketch was being drawn. He looked at Mu Hyen and So Yun frozen in his hands, whose models had already turned into gray pencil shadows, and then shifted his gaze to the glowing point on the association spire. Recycle bin purge, Siwoo whispered, and his enormous graphite wings behind his back spread to maximum width, covering all the sky above the Jongno district. They didn't tell you that I already came back from your recycle bin once. And this time, I came with a full tank of ink. The extreme cold of digital deletion was mounting. This was not the frost of rotting pine needles. This was absolute void, the kind that erases pixels to pure white, turning code into clean, sterile nothing. The entire Jongno district froze. The car sirens below choked off. Seoul's neon signs all paled at once, and the colossal point on the association's spire swelled to the size of a blinding, blue geometric sun. Absolute Zero was ready to crash down and incinerate 5 kilometers of space, erasing Siwoo along with the national ranks and millions of rows of system data. But Siwoo was no longer balancing on the edge of the canvas. He had become the canvas himself. His graphite palms clenched for the last time, and with the dry sound of a closing sketchbook, the bodies of Cho Mu Hyen and Lee So Yun finally collapsed inward into his palate. The two national ranks turned into two thin, concentrated lines, a brown one and a transparent gray one, which slithered like snakes beneath Siwoo's graphite skin, embedding themselves into his ragged structure. Absorption of national ranks. 100% warning. Critical system mass limit exceeded. Your rank transitions to the category. Creator distorted for what reason? Siwoo slowly raised his head toward the falling blue sun of Absolute Zero. His face was no longer the 16-year-old sketch of the tracker. Now it changed continuously. In the span of a second flashed the features of the Shadow Fong, the Stone Slug, Pak Jin Woo, his mother Manhwa Jin, and finally, the face of a 7-year-old frightened boy freezing in a forest. For what reason did you decide that the recycle bin can hold an author? He did not defend himself. Siwoo spread his arms wide, and the tattered graphite cloak behind his back swept upward, tearing the space above Jongno into millions of tiny analog scraps. The blue sun of Absolute Zero broke free from the spire of the Hunter Association. It fell even, clear, erasing along the way the textures of clouds, the air, and gravity itself. But to meet it, coiling into a colossal, predatory vortex, surged the entire ocean of primordial ink accumulated within Siwoo. When the two forces collided, Seoul did not shudder from an explosion. The world simply lost its sound. The blinding blue light of the system attempted to format Siwoo's ink, break it down into comprehensible algorithms and pixels. But the density of the creator's ink was primordial, infinite. The black mass absorbed the blue rays, contaminating them, turning the perfect laser light into dirty, careless strokes of violet gouache. The association's blue sun began to rapidly dim, become covered in ragged cracks, and sag like an undrying drawing in a downpour. Siwoo glided through this collapse of energies, using wind step distorted in its absolute final form. His frame rate had completely broken down. He was present at every point of the falling beam simultaneously. One frame, he is extinguishing the golden barriers of the spire. The next frame, his enormous graphite claws are already sinking into the facade of the association's main building, peeling off its gleaming glass panels like old wallpaper. Chronic, his voice thundered in the ears of every surviving hunter and soul. Your kingdom of 3 guilds, your association, your flawless order. This is a chronic design error, and I am here to apply the final mask. The eye of the all-seeing order above the association building's roof spun wildly, its blue lenses bursting one after another from the colossal strain. The system inside the association's central server began an endless, cyclic data reset, trying to save at least the source code of the Korean server. Siwoo landed squarely on the association's roof, directly before the pulsing terminal of the main server. Around him, space had already completely turned into the ink abode. The sky had become white paper, and all of Gangnam and Jongno below looked like a flat, barely visible sketch of a city, drawn with a thin pencil. He raised his right hand, which now consisted entirely of hundreds of intertwined black threads of national rank mana, the ancient sovereign and his own childish stubbornness. The fingers turned into a colossal, sharp quill, at whose tip pulsed a heavy, violet drop of primordial ink. Before him appeared the last, gigantic system warning, blocking out the entire canvas of reality. Warning. Critical system core detected destruction of object Seoul Central Server. Will result in complete shutdown of the current version of the world. You stand on the threshold of the finale. Do you wish to perform erasure? Siwoo froze. His single human eye looked at the pulsing blue terminal, while his right neon pupil slowly decelerated its frantic spinning, fixing the final point of the composition. He had taken his revenge. His mother, the Punishers, the Association, the national ranks, they had all become paint on his palette. Only one last stroke of the quill remained to close this chapter forever. His hand quill hovered a millimeter from the crystal heart of the server. The ink drop at the tip of the blade trembled, ready to break free and dissolve this world to its foundations. Warning. Protocol initiated. Author's final stroke. Target coordinates. Main core of the Hunter system status. Awaiting confirmation, Siwoo looked at the pulsing blue heart of the server through the veil of ink seeping from his eyes. Around him, Seoul no longer existed. There were no bustling avenues, neon lights, guilds, reputations, or ranks. All that grandeur, for the sake of which his mother had once left a 7-year-old child to die in a ravine, had turned into a flat, gray, careless hatching in the margins of his enormous white sheet. His left, human eye, the eye of a small boy who had simply wanted to be taken home, blinked for the last time. From it rolled a pure, transparent tear. But before it could fall, it instantly dissolved into the heavy, violet drop of primordial ink at the tip of his hand quill. For what reason? Siwoo said quietly, in absolute vacuum silence, and his voice no longer split into 3. It was the voice of a creator closing a book he had finished reading. For what reason must I leave frames for a world that left no room for me? Tool Contour Erasure. Activated. Siwoo forcefully brought the hand quill down, driving the graphite tip into the very center of the glowing crystal terminal. All at once came a dry, deafening crack, the sound of thick watercolor paper being torn in half. From the point of impact, in all directions burst not explosive waves of mana, but colossal, heavy streams of absolutely black pigment. They poured through the system cables, burst into the program code, filling with white noise and dense black fill every pixel of the Korean server. The blue light of the system blinked desperately one last time. Right before one's eyes, the flat outlines of Gangnam's high-rises, the silhouettes of the association, the rusty remnants of the national ranks armor, and the very centuries-old pines of the Black Forest began to rapidly pale. The lines thinned, turning into barely visible pencil sketches, then into light graphite dust, until the entire world around Siwoo faded to an absolute, ringing, sterile whiteness. All layers of reality collapsed. Even clear, the frame closed. Amid the boundless, soundless white space, where there was neither up nor down, neither time nor ranks, sat a small 7-year-old boy. He no longer wore heavy granite armor. The charred branches of the Master of the Thicket or a tattered graphite cloak. An ordinary gray down jacket, dirted in the ravine, and dark hair falling softly onto his forehead. His right neon eye had gone out, becoming deep, dark, and human once more. Beneath his eyes, the rivers of ink no longer flowed. His skin was clean, and his pale cheeks had taken on a slight blush. Siwoo sat on the floor of this boundless white nothing, his legs crossed. Directly before him, on the clean paper, lay a simple wooden brush, its tip lightly touched with violet paint. There was no system here to dictate to him who to be, no guilds to assess his usefulness, no mother whose approval had to be earned at the cost of his own life. The boy slowly reached out his hand, took the brush by its smooth wooden handle, and smiled, for the first time in his entire broken, ragged story. He brought the stained tip to the clean white floor and confidently drew the first line, his own absolutely free line.